There is a message coming to you right now. Not through a phone, not through words. Through something older and deeper than either of those things. The person who occupies the deepest space in your mind, the one you have been thinking about without being able to stop, is sending you something. And Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to explain why these messages are real, why they arrive the way they do, and what they mean for what is about to happen between you. Dr. Callum Reid had a habit that his colleagues found eccentric, and his clients found strangely comforting. Before every session, he would sit in complete silence for 3 minutes, not reviewing notes, not preparing questions, just sitting, listening to whatever was present in the room before the conversation began. He had developed this habit after reading a passage from Carl Jung that had stayed with him for decades. Jung had written that the most important communications between human beings are almost never the ones that are spoken. They are the ones that travel beneath language, beneath the ordinary surface of words and gestures and expressions. They travel through something that has no name in the modern vocabulary, but that every human being without exception has felt at least once in their lives. The feeling that someone is thinking of you before they call. The sudden sourceless sense of warmth towards someone who is physically far away. The dream that feels less like a dream and more like a visit. The moment when you think of someone with such completeness and such clarity that the distance between you seems for just an instant to dissolve entirely. These are not accidents. They are not imagination. They are, in Jung's framework, the most direct and most honest form of communication that exists between two people who are genuinely connected at the level of the psyche. A young woman named Isla came to Dr. Reid on a Monday morning in early spring. She was 29 years old, quietly spoken, with the kind of attentiveness in her eyes that suggested she noticed things most people walked past. She had been referred to him not for any clinical reason, but because a friend had told her that he was someone who would not dismiss the kind of experience she needed to talk about. She said, "Something has been happening to me for the past several weeks. I keep receiving what I can only describe as signals, and I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like wishful thinking or projection or whatever the rational explanation would be. But these are not vague feelings. They are specific. They arrive at specific moments, and they are always about the same person." Dr. Reid said, "Tell me about the signals." She thought for a moment. "It started with dreams, not romantic dreams, nothing like that. Just dreams, where we were in the same space, and the communication between us was completely clear, completely honest. Nothing like the confusion that has defined the actual situation between us. In the dreams, everything was simple, and I would wake up feeling not sad, but almost informed, like something had been communicated to me that I needed to know." She paused. "Then it started happening during the day too. I would be doing something completely ordinary, something that had no connection to him at all, and suddenly there would be this wave of feeling, not longing exactly, more like presence, like something arriving rather than something being missed. And sometimes, within hours of that feeling, something would happen. A mutual friend would mention his name. A song would come on that meant something to both of us. Once I was thinking about him with particular intensity, and my phone showed me a memory from exactly 2 years before. A photograph from a day we had spent together. The timing was so precise that I stood in my kitchen for a long time afterward just trying to understand what I was supposed to do with that." Dr. Reid nodded slowly. He had heard variations of this account more times than he could count, and every time the person telling it prefaced it the same way, with an apology, with a qualification, with the anticipatory defense of someone who expected to be told they were imagining things. He never told them that, because Carl Jung had documented, with extraordinary rigor and over many decades of clinical observation, the phenomenon he called synchronicity. He defined it as the meaningful coincidence of events that have no causal connection, but that are experienced, by the person to whom they occur, as deeply and unmistakably related. He was not a mystic. He was not making claims about supernatural forces or cosmic intervention. He was a scientist of the psyche, who had observed, too many times to dismiss, that the interior world and the exterior world are not as separate as the modern mind has been taught to believe, that consciousness, at certain levels of depth and intensity, reaches beyond the boundaries of the individual body and mind, that two people who are genuinely connected at the psychic level continue to be connected regardless of physical distance, and that this connection expresses itself, when conditions are right, through exactly the kind of precise and unmistakable signals that Isla was describing. He said, "I want you to understand something before we go further. What you are describing is not the product of a mind that is grasping or projecting or creating meaning where none exists. What you are describing is a mind that is functioning at a level of sensitivity that most people have either never accessed or have trained themselves to shut down. The experiences you are having are not symptoms of wishful thinking. They are symptoms of an unusually open and accurate perception of something real." Isla looked at him. "Something real," she repeated quietly. "Something real," he confirmed. "The question is not whether these signals are genuine. The question is what they are communicating. And more importantly, what you are meant to do with what they are telling you." Jung wrote about the interconnection between people who share what he called a constellated relationship, a relationship that has been activated at the level of the unconscious, where the normal boundaries between self and other become not dissolved exactly, but permeable, where what one person carries emotionally can be felt, sometimes with remarkable precision, by the other, where the interior state of one person communicates itself to the other, through channels that have nothing to do with ordinary sensory perception. This is not extraordinary in the sense of being rare. It is extraordinary in the sense of being extraordinary. Almost everyone has experienced it in some form. The phone call from a parent at the exact moment you were thinking of them. The sense of unease about a friend that arrived hours before you learned they were in trouble. The dream that carried information you had no ordinary means of possessing. These experiences are so common, across every culture and every period of human history, that dismissing them as coincidence requires more faith in the absence of meaning than most people have honestly examined. What Jung did was not to explain them away. He did the opposite. He took them seriously as data. He studied them carefully. He documented them obsessively, and what he concluded was that they reveal something fundamental about the nature of consciousness, that it is not enclosed in individual skulls, isolated and self-contained, having no relationship with other consciousnesses except through the physical medium of language and gesture and proximity, that at a certain depth consciousness participates in something larger, something that connects people who are meaningfully related in ways that do not require physical presence. Isla's person had been thinking about her. This was not wishful interpretation on her part. The signals she was receiving were real signals, not because some mystical force was sending them, but because consciousness, at sufficient depth and with sufficient emotional charge, transmits. And she, with her unusual level of interior sensitivity, was receiving. The question was, what was being transmitted? A man named Declan had come to Dr. Reed a year before Isla with a different presentation of the same phenomenon. He was 35 years old, professionally composed, the kind of man who was much more comfortable analyzing systems than examining feelings. He had come to Dr. Reed originally for something entirely practical, a career transition that was producing more anxiety than he had expected, and 3 sessions in, almost parenthetically, as though mentioning something he expected to be quickly dismissed, he said, "There is also this thing that keeps happening, with someone from my past. I keep thinking of her at very specific moments. And the moments are strange. They are not triggered by memories or by things that remind me of her. They seem to arrive from nowhere, and they are always accompanied by this very particular quality of feeling, not sadness, not longing, more like attention, like being told to pay attention to something." Dr. Reed had set down his pen. He said, "Tell me more about the quality of the feeling." Declan thought carefully. "It is like a frequency, like a signal coming in on a channel you did not know was open, and the signal is not emotional in the ordinary sense. It does not make me want to reach out or do anything specific. It just makes me aware that something is happening, that something has shifted, that whatever the situation is between us, it is not static, it is moving." This is one of the most important and most consistently misunderstood aspects of the phenomenon Jung was describing. The signals that arrive between people who are deeply connected are not always communications of longing or need or desire to reconnect. They are not always invitations to action. Sometimes they are simply transmissions of state, one person's psyche broadcasting its current condition to the others, not because it wants anything specific in return, but because at that level of connection, the boundary between what is mine and what is yours becomes genuinely unclear. Declan's person was not necessarily thinking of him in the way he might have imagined. She was not necessarily sitting somewhere composing mental messages addressed to him, specifically. She was simply in a state of significant interior movement. Something was shifting in her, something was changing, something old was dissolving, or something new was forming, and because their connection existed at the level it did, because their psyches had been genuinely entangled by the depth of what had passed between them, his psyche was registering that movement, the way a seismograph registers a shift in the earth far from where it is located, not because the shift was directed at him, but because he was sensitive enough and connected enough to feel it. Jung described this through his concept of the collective unconscious, the deep layer of the psyche that is not personal, not individual, not enclosed within the single life of a single person, but shared, a kind of psychic field that all human beings participate in simultaneously. And within that field, the people who are most meaningfully connected to each other are, in a very real sense, never entirely separate. Their connection persists beneath the level of ordinary consciousness. It continues to operate, to communicate, to transmit, regardless of physical distance or elapsed time or the practical circumstances of their separate lives. When you feel, with that specific quality of certainty that cannot be argued away, that someone is thinking of you, you are most likely right, not because you are conjuring them, but because they are, in the language of the deep psyche, present, reaching toward you across the distance, sending something that has no name in the ordinary vocabulary, but that your body and your unconscious mind recognize immediately and completely. The next question is always the same, and it is the question that Isla and Declan, and every person who had ever sat across from Dr. Reed with this particular experience eventually asked. What does it mean? And what am I supposed to do? This is where most people make the mistake that causes them the most suffering. They translate the signal into action too quickly. They feel the presence of the other person with that quality of certainty, and they immediately convert it into a plan. They are thinking of me, therefore I should reach out. They are sending me something, therefore I should send something back. The signal becomes a permission slip for a decision they had already been wanting to make. But Dr. Reed had learned, and Jung had written, that the first response to a signal of this kind should never be action. It should be attention, deep, honest, interior attention, not to the other person, to yourself, to what the signal is producing in you, to what it is revealing about where you are in your own psychological journey, to what it is asking you to understand before it asks you to do anything at all. Because the message your person is sending you is real, but the meaning of that message, the truth it carries, the thing it is actually trying to communicate, is almost never what the anxious or the hopeful or the impatient mind immediately decides it is. Isla spent 3 sessions with Dr. Reed, doing nothing but learning to sit with the signals without immediately interpreting them. This was, she told him, one of the most difficult things she had ever attempted, because the mind that receives a signal wants immediately to make it mean something specific, wants to package it into a narrative, wants to know what to do with it, and every time she resisted that impulse, and simply stayed with the raw experience of what was arriving, she found that there was more information in it than the quick interpretation would have allowed. What she discovered, slowly and with some resistance, was that the signals were not all carrying the same content. Some of them were, as she had initially assumed, transmissions of his presence, of his awareness of her, of his continued engagement with the connection between them, even across the silence that had settled over their actual relationship. But others were carrying something different, something that she had been filtering out because she had been so focused on what the signals said about him. Some of the signals were about her, were coming from her, were the expressions of parts of her own psyche that she had been externalizing, projecting outward onto the figure of this person, because it was easier to receive them as messages from outside than to acknowledge them as truths arising from within. This is one of the most precise and most disorienting discoveries that Jung's framework produces when applied honestly to these kinds of experiences. The signal you are receiving from your person is real, and simultaneously some of what you are experiencing as a signal from outside is actually a signal from inside, from the parts of yourself that the connection awakened, from the longing that belongs not to the relationship but to your own unmet interior needs, from the aspects of yourself that this person reflected back to you, and that you have not yet found a way to access independently of them. Distinguishing between these two streams, between what is genuinely coming from the other person and what is coming from your own depth, is not a simple task. It requires a quality of honest self-examination that most people find genuinely difficult. because it requires you to look at your own longing clearly enough to see where it is really coming from. And sometimes what it is really coming from is uncomfortable to acknowledge. Declan reached this point in his own process with a different kind of resistance. He was analytical by temperament, and he had, by the time he reached this stage of the work, constructed a fairly convincing framework in which the signals he was receiving were meaningful external transmissions, and his responses to them were simply appropriate and rational. He had intellectualized the experience to the point where it had become almost comfortable. And then Dr. Reed asked him a question that dismantled the entire structure. He said, "When the signal arrives, what does it ask of you? Not what do you want to do in response. What does the signal itself actually ask of you?" Declan was quiet for a long time, and then he said, very quietly, "It asks me to be honest." Dr. Reed waited. "About the fact that I have been using her, in my mind, as a way to avoid something. I have been focused on what might still exist between us, as a way of not looking at what is missing in the life I am actually living, and the signals, if I am honest about them, are not telling me she is coming back, or that something is about to happen between us. They are telling me to look at myself, to look at the place in my own life that I have been keeping empty because I have been filling it, mentally, with the possibility of her. This is where the message from your person changes everything, not because of what it says about them, but because of what it reveals about you, because of where it directs your attention when you are honest enough to follow it all the way to its actual destination. Jung wrote that the psyche always, without exception, moves toward wholeness, that every signal, every dream, every synchronistic event, every experience of being reached by someone across impossible distance, is in service of that movement, is pointing in some way toward some aspect of your own completeness that has not yet been integrated, some part of your interior life that is asking to be acknowledged, developed, reclaimed, or simply seen. The message from your person is real. They are thinking of you. Their psyche is in contact with yours, in the way that all deeply connected psyches remain in contact regardless of circumstance. That is true, and it matters. But the full truth, the truth that changes everything, is larger than that. The message is not only from them, it is from you, to you, through them, through the connection that exists between you, through the channel that was opened the moment your two psyches recognized each other, and that has remained open ever since regardless of whatever has happened in the external world between you. And that message, the full message, the one that is worth actually receiving, is this. Something is shifting, not only in them, in you. Something that was closed is opening. Something that was defended is softening. Something that was held at a careful distance from your own awareness is moving closer to the surface. And the timing of these signals, the precision with which they are arriving, is not coincidence. It is the psyche's way of marking a moment, of saying this is significant, pay attention, something is ready to change. Isla came to her final session with Dr. Reed with a quality of settledness that had not been present at the beginning. Not the settledness of someone who had received a definitive answer about the external situation. The external situation had not changed in any dramatic way, but something in her relationship to it had changed completely. She said, "I think I have been waiting for the signals to tell me what is going to happen, to tell me whether he is going to reach out, whether something is going to resolve, whether the story is going to have the ending I kept hoping for. And what I realize now is that the signals were never about that. They were never telling me about the future of the relationship. They were telling me about the present state of myself. And that present state was someone who was living in anticipation of something external, rather than in the fullness of something internal." She paused. The message was not he is coming back. The message was you are ready. Ready to stop waiting. Ready to stop holding yourself in suspension. Ready to be fully present in your own life, rather than partially present in a life you were hoping might happen. Dr. Reed said, "And now that you have received that message?" She smiled, a real smile, not the composed, careful smile of someone managing their feelings, but the smile of someone who has finally put something down that they had been carrying for a very long time. She said, "Now I live it, because this is where every genuine signal, every real transmission between connected psyches, every experience of your person reaching you across distance and silence and time, eventually points, not toward them, toward you, toward the most complete and most honest and most fully inhabited version of yourself that this experience, with all its weight and all its beauty and all its impossibility, has been preparing you to become. Jung said, near the end of his life, that he had come to believe that the soul knows what it needs, not the ego, with its plans and its fears and its insistence on things being a certain way, but the soul, the deep center of the psyche that is always, quietly and without drama, moving toward the truth of what a person actually is and what they actually need in order to become fully themselves. The message your person is sending you is real. Receive it completely. Do not filter it through hope or fear, or the anxious desire for a specific outcome. Just receive it, all of it, the part that comes from them, and the part that comes from you, the part that speaks of connection, and the part that speaks of growth, the part that acknowledges what exists between you, and the part that points toward what needs to exist within you. Because when you receive it fully, when you let it land in the deepest and most honest part of yourself, you will find that it is not delivering a verdict about your relationship. It is delivering something more valuable than that. It is delivering you, back to yourself, more completely than you have been in a very long time, and that is the message that changes everything. Not because it answers the question you have been asking, but because it shows you that the question you have been asking was never the right one. The right question was never what is going to happen between us. The right question was always who am I becoming through this? And the answer to that question is already here, already present, already arriving, signal by signal, moment by moment, in the exact precision of what you have been feeling. You only have to be still enough, and honest enough, and brave enough to finally receive it.